Whether artists want to keep the audience up to date with a certain franchise or to offer a new vision, remakes will always be among us in movies, theater, music, and video games. The announcements of Resident Evil 4 and The Last of Us remakes have caught my interest in some way as a survival horror fan myself. But on the other hand, I've noticed some discrepancies with other people that really don't need another iteration of their beloved games. So I was thinking, is there a right time to remake something, and if so, how should it be done? I'm Leo S. Luna, and I probably won't have all the answers for you. However, I'll promise to deep dive in the consciousness of fans and developers, or myself, to find interesting information that could give us some answers. I know it sounds pretty obvious that most remakes do generate a lot of money, but that's easy to assume, and it's not necessarily the case. Movies are a good example of this. Did you know that movie remakes represent a large minority of overall releases? Stephen Follow did a fantastic research where he tries to guess how long does Hollywood wait before remaking a movie. I'll leave you the article in my description if you want to read it, but basically he samples movies from the last 30 years, starting from 1990 up until 2019. Of the thousands of pictures released during those 3 decades, only 4.2% were remakes. On average, it takes about 27.2 years to remake something. He goes into detail on what exactly is a remake for film enthusiasts and other facts. But of all those things, and for this topic's purpose, I'll stick with the fact that recently released films and older films are most likely to be remade. Directors and studios usually pick recent films to try to carry a topic of a film released in a different country and adapt it in their language of interest. The Grudge, The Departed, and now La Casa de Papel are pretty good examples of that. The other spectrum are titles that have more than 2 decades absent, and studios can appeal both young and older audiences of inviting the whole family to movie theater. Probably films like Mad Max Fury Road and The Lion King are some examples of these kind of movies waiting 3 decades to reappear. Now at the moment, we don't have those stats in the Video Game Guild, but I'm pretty sure they share similarities. In both films and video games, the challenge is to remake the title for audiences that are or could actually be interested. Aside from retelling the story to new audiences, updating the technology behind it is crucial as well. Perfect timing is even more important than everything. Keep in mind this is just a thought, but I personally think the answer is simple. I'm receptive to what authors want to do. If the remake rings a bell for me, good. I have a reason to try it and also go back to the original. If it's disappointing, then I guess I simply pass and stick with the original. Most of the time I try to read reviews and make my judgment. I rarely have I ever bought something without consulting, except, oh boy, Resident Evil 6. But even in that case, I sold it the same month and decided that it wasn't a game for me at the time. Probably a lot of people really want a Silent Hill comeback, but in my mind, those games were so perfect and personal that I don't think it's possible to replicate. Hell, it's like trying to replicate Stanley Kubrick movies. But then I remember that most of Kubrick movies are actually remakes from other books, and deviating a lot from the original source. Actually, book writers didn't even like his films, so I guess I'm receptive to what creators might offer. Once again, you can't control anyone's opinions and creative decisions in any capacity, no matter how much you love your title, no matter how disappointed you feel. But then of course, to invest in a franchise is kind of a compromise that the person has to make with the company. Although it doesn't translate in a desired way most of the time, to be honest. With that thinking, it's safe to ask why in the first place am I investing on remake projects if they are not my alley? But as I told before, we're all humans, and it's safe to take some risks, as long as it doesn't affect us or anyone else. Although risks is not a word I'd use on the harmless act of buying a video game, so harmless and justified enough to not harass developers on Twitter. Now, I'm pretty sure there's an audience arguing that it's way too soon to remake Resident Evil 4 and The Last of Us Part 1. This is pretty common to see, but other than money, I'm pretty sure both Capcom and Naughty Dog are on their golden years of development cycle, and the studio is truly committed to remaking these masterpieces. Plus, I'm pretty sure both studios have proof that there's enough audience who'll buy them. It all comes to updating both games with current technology and adapting a well-regarded story to new generations with the best talented team they currently have. And who knows how long those golden years would last. I mean, VFX artists are starting to rise up and moving away from Marvel Studios due to impossible deadlines and horrible alley working conditions, so yes folks, nothing will stay the same forever. Capcom currently has a talented and creative team on a streak remaking projects with top-tier technology, a re-engine and a more polished level design and narrative. And let's be honest, RE4 released like 18 years ago. That is a long time. There is a new generation that perhaps haven't tried the original one. So it makes sense to apply to a lot of modern techniques to this one. It will be interesting to see AI of Mr. X and Nemesis implemented to fit more intelligent enemies like Las Plagas. Also, there's a more serious to this in particular, something that we haven't seen before in the original RE4. So I guess the span between 15 and 25 years is perfect to remake older games. Also, keep in mind that the RE2 and RE3 remakes are more treated as new games. Then of course, part of the intention is try to make the whole Resident Evil story more cohesive and connected than before. And this is not a new thing at all. Capcom hired Angel Studios, now known as Rockstar San Diego, to port Resident Evil 2 for the Nintendo 64. On that port, you find more new files that tie events to Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica. This port came a year after, and you can consider it to be a remake since they have to remake a lot of the assets to fit 700 megabytes of full motion video, pristine audio and visual quality to the PlayStation 1 version to 64 megabytes of N64 cartridge. So as you can see, Capcom has technically done this in the past for more technical reasons, but then it adds more cohesion to the story down the line. In the case of Naughty Dog's, it's kind of the opposite. So far I can tell, Naughty Dog wants to keep the original narrative and the excellent experience, but updating its mechanics and visuals. They released The Last of Us in the last year of the generation's development cycle. Even though the game is critically acclaimed and the bestseller, it came with lots of hardware limitations of the PlayStation 3, so you can say it was launched ahead of its time, even if it took years to release. An example of that is the release of its remastered version in 2014 that updates the game to 1080p and 60 FPS, which eventually updated to 4K with the release of the PS4 Pro. I guess fans were already used to this since that one sold very well, so there's no need to be surprised by this new remake, right? Anyways, speaking of the original The Last of Us game, gameplay mechanics already began to feel outdated with very strict patterns on action sequences. But to be honest, Naughty Dog doesn't change their formula that much, which is necessarily not bad, it's just their way of making games. Each one of their titles has a similar structure on gameplay and narrative, but it becomes more polished with each iteration, up to the point with The Last of Us Part 2, where they achieve a more polished video game in both gameplay and technology. It's another ball that is still ongoing with the studio that they want to use on remaking the first one on a, let's be honest, a more advanced, stable and developed console that is the PlayStation 5. I guess both studios wanted to take their chances now that they have a qualified team to do so. Remember, we're all humans, and as time told us, not every artist and developer will be at Capcom or Naughty Dog for eternity. They're not going to wait for the perfect time. They just do it and that's it. People like Hideki Kamiya and Shinji Mikami are no longer at Capcom. The same goes to Amy Hennig, where people were thinking it was going to be with Sony for a long time, but that wasn't the case. Most of the best artists and content creators want to constantly be refreshing their career paths and getting out of their comfort zone to stay creative and innovate. Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya are no longer at Capcom, but they are creating new experiences at Tango Gameworks and Platinum Games respectively. Amy Hennig is no longer writing stories for Naughty Dog, but is currently seeking to create a fantastic Star Wars tale with Skydance Media. On Capcom remakes, well, it's a mix between original RE veterans like Kazunori Kadoi and Yasuhiro Ampo directing newer generations of artists and developers that were fans of the first titles and came with fresh ideas that pretty much sound too good to just be ignored. One of the main concerns fans have with remakes is how faithful the new game is going to be. But that's the point of doing a frame-by-frame copy of the same title, right? If the project was already renamed a remake, there are changes to be expected oriented on the team's vision aside from a visual and gameplay update. If the game was entitled as a remaster like Demon's Souls, then it's expected to have the same gaming experience with upgraded graphics. It all comes to what the studios showed us previously. Although on the other hand, it's better not to expect anything until it's released. One example of following an exact copy of the original remaster was Psycho. Not the original 1960 film directed by Alfred Hitchcock, but its 1998 remake directed by Gus Van Sant. Gus took the exact same script and replicated the exact same scenes shot for shot. There was an expectation on Universal and Cos that if audiences loved the original one, there's no reason to change anything but the cast for newer generations to enjoy a classic story. The experiment of course became a huge flop between critics and audiences, and a very awkward and weird experiment with very outdated shots that simply did not capture the essence and acting of the original movie and reflected negligence on editing and acting, forcing the movie in places that actors and production were not in the first place. Come to think of it, older generations are constantly trying to shoot newer ones with old content that simply wasn't there for us at the right time, expecting to have the same impact it had on them back in the day. I always recommend other survival horror titles like Layers of Fear, The Medium, or Martha is Dead, instead of waiting for a miracle to come to save Silent Hill, for example. Anyways, once again, more experience and innovation in technology push studios to take some creative freedom on new projects. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a perfect example. My unpopular opinion, as always, is that PlayStation, N64, and Sega Saturn consoles were on a transition period, and many of the classics we all love, well, to be honest, were not fulfilled in 100% in technology, gameplay, and narrative even. Some of us will remember the turn-based RPG with nostalgia, but the original intention to a game like FF7 was to push it into an action-type game, very similar to what we finally or eventually had in 2019. And Square Enix even pushed farther, considering the limitations of the time. The remake now expanded the world with greater detail and many more places to explore. And they clearly know this. Why? They did not touch any of the action-oriented gameplay from the upcoming Crisis Core remaster and other graphics. The same goes to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, directed by Kazuhiro Aoyama. Yes, I'm heading right there. Even if the remake feels like a shorter game, it accomplishes the original intention, to have both a horror and action chasing sequence of Nemesis against Jill. And this is evidenced with Kiyohiko Sakata's direction. There's no time to stop and solve puzzles on a clock tower and wandering in a park like the original. The 2020 remake is a straight Terminator-like sequence and a struggle for survival. Long gone are the multiple paths that could change the narrative per playthrough. Instead, Capcom decided to tell a linear story, but emphasize way more on the relationship between Jill and Carlos and tie things to Resident Evil 4, which I personally found pretty interesting. Like, if I want to go back and play the original way, I could just play the original, which could be available on stores, but that's another topic for another video. Once again, I'm open to ideas and I truly enjoyed RE2 and RE3 remakes, but it's curious to see even more artists inclined on remaking good games rather than redoing other projects that needed it the most. I'm talking about regular to bad games and commercial failures. Of course, thanks to Capcom's success, perhaps we could see a Code Veronica remake, for example, or perhaps Remedy could surprise us once again with a Max Payne 1 or 2 retelling of the original games with a Northlight graphics engine. Even the Callisto Protocol feels like a remake of the first Dead Space with many interesting ideas from the studio that could shock us once again. And why not enjoy Dead Space remake of EA as well? I mean, I'm open to ideas, and it's okay to not feel inclined to these remakes as long as you don't hurt others, of course. But what do you think of this RE4 and The Last of Us Part 1? Are you excited? Yes? No? And why? Let me know down in the comments, and feel free to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Perhaps I could deep dive on all these remakes and make interviews in the future. Hope you enjoy my rambling and stay safe.